Welcome to the Viking Age podcast. It's the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. My name is Chris Schad. I write for FanSided and Zone Coverage. We do this right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel every Tuesday and Friday morning. We're also in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. But however you consume us, make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. On today's show, is JJ McCarthy a bust after 2 games? Is Max Sprosmer your new quarterback god? And who will actually be playing for the Vikings when they take on the Bengals on Sunday afternoon? But before we get to all of that, I have to introduce our special guest for today's episode. He is from the Wide Left Substack. You can check that out at wideleft.football. Co-host of the Norse Code podcast. And you're still doing Minnesota Football Party, right?
Yeah, they renamed it to Viking Squad Show, which I want to remind people I was not a big part of that naming decision. So
you weren't in the rebranding meeting.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, whatever he's on, whatever it's called, his name remains the same. It is Arif Hasan. Arif, I feel like I should start with my condolences first because Carson Wentz is starting a game for the Minnesota Vikings. I called it several years ago, but I don't think I need to take I don't want to take a victory lap. Like what? This is awful. What the hell is this?
For me personally, it feels as if the arc of the universe bends towards injustice. This felt inevitable. Um, I will say, right? So like he had a presser the other day. He talked about kind of what he's learned about his multiple stops. And, one of the primary concerns that I had about Carson Wentz, just in the locker room were kind of the reports that he was a bad locker room leader in Philadelphia, and that was also kind of a reason they moved on from him in Indianapolis. And there were kind of some rumors in Washington, but that was significantly less of a concern there, and players proactively vouched for him. So that is a little bit different. But it was a concern. Of course, he goes to the Rams, he goes to the Chiefs. They probably, wouldn't have put up with him if he wasn't, a little bit more enabled to be a backup from an attitude perspective, which was the problem in Philadelphia. And I mean, obviously Kevin O'Connell knows these guys, right? So he would have gotten good feedback from like Sean McVay about Carson Wentz. And so there was something, but it was nice to hear him talk about things like lessons learned, gratitude for being able to play the game and not feeling as if he was kind of entitled to a spot, which felt like the root of his problems in Philadelphia, right? So from an off-field perspective, we're hearing kind of the things that maybe we want to hear, and it's kind of on that path we want to go on. But he is a backup quarterback for a reason. And so I'm concerned about the level of talent there. And also I'm concerned about my mentions if he does well. So two equally valid concerns.
As someone who has had his mentions blow up because he, after having double-digit beers at the Vikings game on Sunday and going like, "Oh, Adam Thielen," and like all of a sudden it's just like, "Hey, you're blowing up right now, right?" I'm like, not anymore. I muted it, but yeah, people did not like me challenging Adam Thielen for 2 catches in 2 games. But I mean, Carson Wentz. Before we get into McCarthy, because I do want to focus on this, like what kind of expectations do you have? Because like you said, he is a backup. His last start with Kansas City did not go well, although he was playing with 100% backups in that game. Like, do you think he can kind of steady the ship? Because right now the Vikings are kind of an unhinged team.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one way to take a look at that question is also to kind of take a look at what problems have been plaguing the Vikings, right? And seeing kind of whether his strengths and weaknesses interact with that in some way. So one of the issues the Vikings have is their operation, right? Just especially on offense, just kind of how smooth it is to get in and out of the huddle, how much time they have left to get to the line of scrimmage, how they handle motions at the line of scrimmage, how they handle making sure players are aligned correctly, stuff like that. And that's something they've been doing very poorly. And, I've been reluctant to, praise Carson Wentz, but that is something I'm confident, he'll handle better than McCarthy did. And I don't think that that's a huge knock on McCarthy. Obviously, it's a valid criticism, but it's not like a long-term potential problem. I mean, it could be, but I don't think that that's the way we should treat it. And I think that having that operation kind of secured is one area that would be a reason that like McVay would recommend Wentz. to O'Connell, right? Like I think that as a backup quarterback, that's kind of one of the things the Ifs have nailed. And I don't recall actually that being an issue in Philadelphia. And it's not as if, right, the Doug Peterson offense was like remarkably simple, right? Like it's, in fact, I would argue that the current Philadelphia offense is much simpler than the one that Carson Wentz operated under. So, in terms of the load on the quarterback, the cognitive load on the quarterback, that is not as much a concern. So, what are the other problems? Well, McCarthy held on to the ball too long. That invited pressure, right? Obviously, there are offensive line problems. It sounds like some of those might get, improved, right? We might get a better handling of those offensive line problems. But to me, the offensive line issues amplified the bigger concern of McCarthy holding onto the ball too long. There are a bunch of reasons that might be the case. Receivers might not be getting open, but he just needs to get rid of the Vikings had the second longest time to throw in the NFL over the past 2 weeks, according to Next Gen Stats. I believe PFF has them third. It doesn't matter the exact ranking. It's a lot. And the other ones are like Justin Fields, right? Like these are guys that are not only known for holding onto the ball, and that's a huge problem, but at least have the tools to kind of deal with invited pressure. McCarthy is an athlete, but he is not Justin Fields level athlete, right? He's not Lamar Jackson level athlete. And so his capacity to hold onto the ball results in more bad pressures. So what do we think about Wentz? Well, after his injury in 2017 in Philadelphia, Wentz repeated a problem that he had in college, which is that he would hold on to the ball too long. But that problem seemingly has diminished since going to Indianapolis, Washington, et cetera, and so on. And especially in Las Vegas and Kansas City. And so while I still think it's a concern, having the same weakness does not mean it's the same problem. If you can reduce that particular weakness, which I think Wentz does, I don't think his time to throw is ever as long as McCarthy's is. And the Kevin O'Connell offense exacerbates time to throw. So those things can always change. But I think that though it is a weakness that is not nearly as much of a problem as it is with McCarthy. So that's another kind of area that might be resolved. Whether or not he reads things correctly, I don't know. My interpretation of the way Carson Wentz has played over the past 4 years is that he kind of breaks down after his first read, which is not really the way I interpret McCarthy, but there's also just not a lot to go on with that particular kind of evaluation when it comes to McCarthy. And certainly, it wasn't like he was taking advantage of his first read. So, if the first read isn't there, I think Wentz, more than most quarterbacks, tends to panic, scramble, try to create something out of nothing. But at least he's got better tools to handle that than McCarthy does. In addition to being kind of just a better athlete, like just faster, he's also bigger and stronger, which means that, he's got, a better ability to maybe stiff arm to create additional time or space. He's got the ability to kind of take on a hit. If it's like a blitzing nickel corner, that's a lot different for him than it is for McCarthy, right? So he's got the tools if he is panicking to at least handle that panic a little bit better. But I think it puts kind of a ceiling on this offense. When he was playing well, when Wentz was playing well, he really enjoyed the deep ball. He's really good at throwing the deep ball. And this offense thrives on the deep ball. And I think almost more than any other offense, which I think nationally doesn't have that reputation, but I think here in Minnesota, we kind of understand like that's the thing they do. Sam Darnold led the league last year in explosive plays. Like that's the thing they do. And it seems to be the thing that they want to do in Minnesota. After the first half against Chicago, where it was all short passes and stuff like that, it's been just big explosive play designs. And I think that's something that they'll want to unlock with Carson Wentz, but we haven't seen from him over the past 3 or so years in Washington, with the Rams, the Chiefs. We did see a fair amount of that in Indianapolis. So it's not as far removed as some of these other elements that I'm talking about. So I'm curious about how that's going to kind of play out. But if not, right, then we're going to have to figure out what that offense looks like. This offense has more play action in it than it's had over the past 2 years. I think that's kind of a nod to what McCarthy is comfortable with, but it also might just be kind of part of the emphasis on the run game that they've kind of included into their roster decisions these past 2 years. And it might just be kind of, Kevin O'Connell's kind of rebuying into play action after having done it so often under Sean McVay with Los Angeles. So Carson Wentz is comfortable in play action. We've seen him do a bunch of under center stuff over the years, but I think that's going to be kind of an interesting thing because I think a lot of his excellent play action stuff came from shotgun. play action, which is not really kind of the same thing. So we'll see how all of that offense comes together. But there's just I think there's a cap on what he can do. But if he can minimize the mistakes, and it seems like he might be able to, right? Minimize the mistakes. He's still an inaccurate quarterback, but so is McCarthy, right? Um, then you might be able to keep the offense just on schedule enough to take advantage of how well. I personally think the defense is playing really well, how well the defense can play. So that's kind of where I'm at, and that makes it sound like Wentz is an upgrade over McCarthy at the moment. And begrudgingly, I think I have to admit that that's the most likely scenario over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, being on schedule is something the Vikings have struggled with really throughout the first two games. I remember that I think ESPN showed a graphic during the Bears game where it was like their average distance on third down was 9.8, which means they weren't getting anything on the first two plays. Obviously, it was just kind of like, ooh, this is really bad. They opened it up in the fourth quarter. McCarthy led the comeback, and then the Falcons, whether it was the offensive line, whether it was McCarthy just kind of swimming and everything, it was just kind of a combination of the factors that it was a really weird night. I look at Carson Wentz, and maybe, sometimes what I like to do is, where in Vikings history does this kind of resemble it? And I think in 2008 with Gus Frerotte taking over for Tavares Jackson, does not mean JJ McCarthy is Tavares Jackson, but I'm just saying quarterback kind of needs, this is different because McCarthy is hurt, but Frerotte stepped in 8-3, 12 touchdowns, 2,157 yards, 15 interceptions. That's probably not going to fly, but it's kind of like, when you go to a fancy restaurant and you have valet parking and you flip the keys, you say, hey, don't crash the car, kid. That's pretty much what JJ McCarthy is doing for Carson Wentz right now. And some people are saying, well, if Wentz plays well, they got to keep rolling with him. I think if Carson Wentz puts up, 230 yards, maybe 3 touchdowns, and the Vikings go 2-1 or 3-0, I think the job goes back to JJ McCarthy coming out of the bye. How long do you think this team will be willing to ride Carson Wentz? Or I'll throw this out there too, because a lot of people are screaming it online. Is JJ McCarthy a bust already in your mind?
Yeah, I'll answer that last part first. No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
2 games.
It's just 2 games. And 2 games with relatively limited passing attempts. It's not like he threw the ball 50 times. We just don't have enough evaluation time. And then also you just kind of have to acknowledge, like, you still got to have experience beyond that, right? So I think people forget kind of the way that they interpreted a lot of quarterbacks as first starts over the years. I know that people go back all the way to like Troy Aikman and Peyton Manning and Terry Bradshaw, even if you're going way far back. And yeah, those were bad rookie seasons. But if you want to go back and look at some of the quarterbacks that we value a lot right now and only look at the first 2 games, some of them were pretty bad. CJ Stroud was actually mediocre in his first 2 games, ends up with an offensive rookie of the year candidacy. Jaden Daniels' first 2 games were actually the worst games of his rookie season, and they were not that great. PFF graded 55 over those 2 games. He did all right his rookie year, right?
Yeah.
Justin Herbert, same thing. So games 2 and 3, because Tyrod Taylor played week 1 before they decided to stab him, I guess. I don't really know how that...
he ran into Dr. Nick and everything changed from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But games 2 and 3, Justin Herbert didn't play all that well. I think his PFF grade was also around 50. And he, unfortunately for Justin Jefferson, won offensive rookie of the year. Now that's not fair, but he played well, right? That's the goal that we're kind of looking for here. So even when we're looking at good rookie seasons, the first 2 games can sometimes be really bad for a lot of these guys that we value. And then on top of that, you've got guys who early on, like Josh Allen, right, who not only had a really bad rookie year, but also had a bad first 2 games. Jared Goff, bad rookie year and a bad first 2 games. These are guys that none of us would characterize as bust. Even the Rams, who traded away Jared Goff, would not characterize that as a wasted draft pick, right? They got a lot out of them that got to a Super Bowl, right? So I think that it's... When these things happen, it's important to kind of take a step back and look at history, especially because a good first 2 games doesn't tell us a ton either. I mean, Christian Ponder's first 2 starts with the Vikings were actually great.
I'm going to look that up right now. I feel like you're right.
His first start, I believe, was against the Packers. He had that deep ball to Michael Jenkins.
Yep.
That was awesome. It was also the best throw I ever remember him making.
Yeah.
Um, so like these are the kinds of things that can trick us. These like small samples where um over time we forget about them, but in the moment become so important because it's the only access to any information that we have. Yeah, the game is clearly a little bit too fast for McCarthy. Is he screwed? I don't know. He could be like an Anthony Richardson, who I still, if I'm being honest, believe in. Or, he could be like a Bryce Young, where like, hey, after he came back, Bryce Young kind of had it, right? And I don't even know that he's playing that poorly now. I mean, the team's not doing well. I don't know that Bryce Young himself is playing all that poorly now. So any number of like any combination of outcomes can be had here, and 2 games just doesn't give us enough information to tell us about his long-term prospects. It tells us a lot about what the problems are right now, but it doesn't tell us a lot about his long-term prospects. As for kind of Carson Wentz's capability to kind of win the job, um, I'm really curious about what process by which the Vikings would end up making that decision, because the locker room responds really strongly to on-field results, right? Like wins, right? And if you've got a quarterback and he's winning and you bench that guy, that's going to feel a little tough. But if he's not playing well and you're winning, then like maybe you kind of upset the locker room a little bit, but from a process perspective, that's really good. And then the alternative, if he's playing outstanding ball, right, for like 3 weeks, um, but the Vikings like go 1-2 or something like that. I mean, I would say to keep him in, right? Because long term, over the course of the season, you're more likely to win than lose with good quarterback play. And we don't know that McCarthy has good quarterback play. We at least see, this guy who stepped in having good quarterback play. So I don't know. Obviously, the ideal scenario for the Vikings is that it becomes a really tough choice because Carson Wentz plays really well and they go 3-0. And now they're like, oh, I don't know. JJ McCarthy is healthy again. But like, why would we do that? And great. Like that's an awesome kind of outcome to have. You just now have a new problem to solve, which is way better than the problem of how do we keep our season alive. And obviously in that circumstance, I would suggest, hey, dude, just stick with them. You've got a bunch of veterans. A lot of these guys are not going to stick around for a long time. Ryan Kelly's not going to be back next year. I don't know if Van Ginkel's going to be back next year. Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, I don't know if they're going to be back next. Like, just do it. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's really dependent on what the Vikings decision-making process is here and how important process is versus how important results are in terms of the way that they approach this.
So I went back and I looked at Christian Ponder's first 2 games. He got into that game against Chicago in week 6 in 2011. Doesn't really count. It wasn't a start. And Donovan McNabb was probably on the sideline eating Burger King or something. The first start against the Packers, Ponder went 13 of 32, but 219 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So
that's so great. That's the least Christian Ponder start ever. That's amazing.
Right.
Just big plays all the time, low completion percentage.
It was 6.8 yards per attempt, but 5.28 air yards per attempt. So I don't know if he was just like chucking it to Percy Harvin or whatever. He also had 4 rushes for 31 yards. I remember him running all over the place in that start. The following week, though, he actually looked pretty good. 18 of 28, 236 yards, a touchdown, 8.4 yards per attempt, 9.14 air yards per attempt. So
dude,
if you looked at what's that?
That's the quarterback of the future, man.
Exactly. He had a couple of games. He had a couple more games. Let's see what else we got in here. We got a game
His
against
rookie year was better than the 2012 season that followed with the Adrian Peterson MVP season. That season was truly horrific. So his rookie year numbers are actually better, if I recall correctly.
And then that last game against the Packers in 2012, he actually like had the best game of his career to get him into the playoffs. And then
like his arm exploded. And
it was too much. It was like, no, you're being too good. No, his elbow.
And compartment syndrome. It was like, oh, geez. Joe Webb had to play.
We introduced the world to Joe Webb shortly after. It was great. He also had, this is very fun to look at. He had an 8.3 quarterback rating in the final game of the year, 4 of 10, 28 yards, an interception. Maybe he got hurt in that game. I don't know. But
8.3 is wild. That's
that
amazing.
that is obscene quarterback rating, not QBR or anything. That's
right.
like
Yeah. That's like anything. Obviously, anything below a 39.6 is notable because that's what you get when you only throw in completions.
right.
Like 8 is like that. That's a rare find.
You could just get lost for hours on Football Reference or baseball, whatever your poison is.
Love
It'd
it,
just be
dude.
like, oh my God, just look at all these crazy numbers. There's one more quarterback question. So basically what we're getting at is, it's 2 games. You don't know what you have. Maybe when JJ McCarthy gets healthy, everything is there. I want to ask one more question before we go, or not before we go. We got a long ways to go
Before we
here,
move
but
on. Yeah.
yes. Max Brosmer. There are a lot of people who are. I saw a Brosmer jersey at the Vikings game on Sunday.
That
I'm like,
rules.
yeah, it
Shout
rules.
out
But
to
I was like,
whoever that is.
what is going on here? This is, I never saw any Sloter jerseys at US Bank Stadium. So, are people just, hey, our Gophers quarterback is good, let's go support him? Or do you think he can be a viable option? Let's say Carson Wentz doesn't play well and Kevin O'Connell goes, all right, kid, here you go.
I mean, I think the Slaughter point is well received. Obviously, the Vikings value Brosmer more than they valued Slaughter because Slaughter is gone and doing podcast interviews and slandering people. Just like classic quarterback stuff, right?
Yeah.
And the reason that Zimmer didn't continue the Slaughter experiment is because he would just do whatever, and it happened to work out in the preseason. But it's an understanding from a process perspective that's not going to work out in the long term. What's really interesting is that during those Slaughter games, I got to sit next to Sage Rosenfels in the press box, right? And so I got to hear his real-time feedback for what Slaughter was doing while he's like throwing these touchdowns and all that. And real time, like before Slaughter's like letting go of the ball. It's so cool. I wish everybody had this experience. Sage is calling out the coverages and the routes and the plays in telling you in real time. Well, he's talking to himself. I just happen to be next to him. But essentially telling you in real time where the ball needs to go, where the quarterback's eyes need to be. And so he was getting agitated and frustrated the whole time, all while Slaughter has, I believe, the best passer rating in the history of the preseason, right? At least for a non-starter, because I think Tom Brady has had, but like at least for like a non-starting quarterback, it's like number 1 is him and number 2 is Sage, which is very funny to me. Yeah, and so like he's getting apoplectic, right? While all of this is happening and Slaughter's throwing touchdowns and completing these 20-yard bombs and avoiding sacks. And Sage is like, the curl was wide open. What are you doing? That kind of stuff, right? And it's like, that's the approach you need to take if you want to project the guy into NFL play. And I imagine that Brosmer, who got rid of the ball really quickly, he had a really good first read throw rate and stuff like that, has and that was the thing that they praised him for in the offseason too, is his command of the offense in a way that they didn't really anticipate or expect. I imagine that that's a completely different thing, but it is important to remember he wasn't playing against defenders that had the ability to close down with the speed that starters do. He was playing against defenders that weren't drafted because they ran a 4.6, right? And so that is an important piece of context. And so I tend to trust the Vikings on quarterback decisions. They're testing that given how poorly McCarthy played. But I tend to trust the quarterback decisions, and I would say probably that they're on to something when it comes to making sure that they have a veteran actually start. Now, they always want to have a veteran in the building because backup quarterbacks do so much more than just be ready in the game and go in, right? And so a veteran is really useful for all of those ancillary functions of a backup quarterback, but that doesn't mean that he has to be the guy when you've got a new start. And clearly they could have had it so that Brosmer started and then Wentz continued to be the backup, especially because Brosmer has more experience in this specific offense over Wentz, right? And they chose not to do that. And I think the reason for that is they want to cut down on some of these operational errors, right? McCarthy, if I recall correctly, didn't have any operational errors in his like 12 dropbacks in the preseason, right? And so the fact that Brosmer didn't have any doesn't tell us that that's not going to be what's happening in a full stadium, even when it's at home in a full stadium with a bunch of fans yelling, with the lights up and the defense doing a much more exotic stuff than they do in the preseason and all of that, right? There's a lot more that goes into it. The preseason is kind of like an amuse-bouche, right? It's like an appetizer. It doesn't give you an understanding of what the meal is going to be like. And that is kind of the difference. And so I trust them when they choose to pick Carson Wentz over Max Brosmer, but because of how strong Brosmer has been, I might be and my whole bias against Carson Wentz, I might be a little bit more inclined if struggles happen to be a little bit early to call for Brosmer to come into the game, maybe more than other people, maybe more than rational people would. But that's kind of like where I think I land is just like I don't have a ton of evidence that Carson Wentz is going to be playing out of his mind versus Max Brosmer because I don't know really Brosmer's true talent level. There's just stuff that we kind of like about him. But I think he's shown enough for us to at least think about it if Wentz also struggles.
Yeah, and I think he should be on the roster. He did show a lot. There were some good throws. He got rid of the ball quickly. They're all things that you can point to in a Kevin O'Connell offense. I also feel like sometimes, we're very territorial. Look at how many Carson Wentz. This is his dream. He's from North Dakota, which is kind of like Minnesota. Adam Thielen again. Wow, he's back, and we gave up the equivalent of a 4th-round pick to get him. It's just little things like that. And I'm kind of sitting here, when I see the dark corner of Gopher Twitter or Vikings Twitter talking about put Brosmer in instead of McCarthy, it's kind of like, are you sure about that right now? Like, are you sure? I don't know. I don't think if you are truly serious about winning games, you can't put Max Brosmer in. And maybe, Carson Wentz rolls an ankle on the first series on Sunday. Max Brosmer comes in and lights it up, and I look like an idiot. It wouldn't be the first time. But I also just think, let's chill out. It's 2 games. I think JJ McCarthy is going to be fine. And if he looks like he does, like he did on Sunday at the end of December, we can have a conversation. I think right now, don't alter your plans. Rest up JJ McCarthy and go beat the Bengals on Sunday.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best approach here, especially because it's kind of late to have this discussion anyway. They've already gone through all the practices this week with Carson Wentz. But yeah, I think that, like you said, there's definitely a Minnesota appeal about this whole deal, which I totally understand and sympathize with. But their job is not to cater to the short-term, desires of a fan base. Their job is to win a Super Bowl, which the fan base ultimately will appreciate more in the end, right? So you got to make decisions in the context of what's going to help, produce the most wins, both in the short term and in the long term. And I think that's going to be the guy who has started with 50, 60, 70 games in the NFL over this undrafted free agent quarterback. I don't want to knock Brosmer too much. He has already exceeded the expectations of 90% of undrafted quarterbacks. He's already outdone them. But the thing is, it's a long road from there to Romo, right? It's that's a huge gap. So I would say you just got to be cautious with being super excited about, what happens in those scenarios.
So with all that quarterback discourse out of the way, I'm going to pause. I'm going to talk about Underdog because football is back, and Underdog is the best place to make picks and win money all season long. Playing Underdog is easy. Just pick whether your favorite players will go higher or lower on stats like touchdowns, receiving yards, interceptions, and more. Get your picks right, and you can win up to 5,000 times your cash, and you can play with as little as $1. I've been playing Underdog for years, and I'll tell you just how easy it is. Woke up this morning, got in the gym, came back to the apartment, poured some coffee, broke out the Underdog app because I knew there's some football going on tonight. I went higher on 1.5 passing touchdowns for Josh Allen. I went higher for 236.5 passing yards for Tua Tagovailoa. And with a special promo for tonight's game, I could win up to 3.8 times my money if I am right on both of those picks. All while from drinking coffee and getting ready for the day. It is super easy. All you have to do is download the app today and sign up with the promo code The Age, which is all one word, and you score $50 in bonus funds when you play your first $5. That's promo code The Age, all one word. Millions of fans have already won billions making picks on Underdog. Will you be next? Underdog, make picks, win money. You must be 18 plus, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 plus in Colorado for some games, 21 plus in Arizona, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. See assets.underdogfantasy.com/web/play and get terms _DFS_.html for details. Not valid in Maryland, Michigan, Ohio, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. If you are concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. And in New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY to 467-369. All right. Let's talk about these injuries because everybody is hurt. The offensive line is a big topic of discussion right now. Christian Darrisaw practiced in full on Wednesday. He was out on Thursday, but it sounds like he will practice again on Friday. And that, according to Ben Gessling, that's kind of what the Vikings are going to do to handle his return. Ryan Kelly also suffering his fourth concussion since the start of the 2023 season. Not great. This offensive line, is Christian Darrisaw the straw that stirs the drink, or is there something else they need to do to protect whoever is under center for the Vikings?
Yeah, so I'm in the middle of writing a piece kind of about the problems the Vikings are about to face because they're up against one of the best pass rushing slates I've ever seen in terms of opponents. Like Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson this next week, of course, Micah Parsons twice this year. The fact that, Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness and Devontae Wyatt are all playing really well. They've got the entire AFC North, right? They've got, Alex Highsmith, it sounds like his injury is actually not significant enough to maybe put him out of that. I'm going to double check on that before I finish the piece, but it sounds like he may be back sooner than we expected. But even so, Nick Herbig has been playing really well for them. TJ Watt obviously is still playing for the Steelers. Like it is a nuts pass rush. Khalil Mack, his injury is not nearly as bad, so he'll probably be back by the time the Vikings play him. It's a crazy pass rush schedule that they've got up ahead of them. And so I wanted to take a look at kind of like what are the nature of the pass rush problems. And one thing that I found super interesting is that the majority of the pressures that the Vikings have been seeing so far, at least in these two games, have not actually been from Justin School's side. They've been from the other side, which is not to say that it's Brian O'Neill's fault, but rather that the pressures could be coming up the middle or they could be coming on stunts or whatever. But the primary pressure problem is coming from elsewhere. About 26% of pressures are coming from players that are lined up at 4 technique or wider, so head up over the tackle or wider. That could be because of blitzes and stuff like that, but what it means is that though Justin School is playing very, very poorly, and Walter Rouse is probably not going to be a huge upgrade over that, right? That means that the problem will persist once you replace the left tackle. And so whether that's because Brian O'Neill had at least 1 or 2 miscommunication errors that led to big hits, one of them obviously a sack fumble, whether that's because, there's a problem relaying the pass protection rules to the running back, whether that's because Will Fries is playing poorly, which he is, whether that's because you've got a problem at center, which you do without Ryan Kelly in there, whether it's because Donovan Jackson, who after a really good game against the Bears had a really poor game this last week, whatever it is, all of these other problems will not be solved with Christian Darrisaw. You might be able to make an argument if School was getting a lot of help, which Darrisaw doesn't need, and maybe you could move that help elsewhere, but that's not what I'm seeing. And so the problems will likely be solved, A, as Donovan Jackson continues to develop and grow, but B, with the veteran quarterback in there. That might actually help solve some of the problems, because some of these problems are like stunts and twists and communication errors, right? And so Darrisaw is not going to solve that. Like the Vikings are pretty poor at passing off stunts right now, and maybe Darrisaw is better at picking them up or passing them off. And so that from one perspective, that's going to solve a small problem there. But I think for the most part, all of these other problems are still going to kind of persist. You'll improve the pass protection, but I think that the other problems need to be solved in some way, whether that's because you've got that veteran quarterback in there, whether that's because Michael Juergens becomes really much more comfortable with the communication role that he has to have as a center, whether Will Fries performs up to the level that the Vikings need him to, whatever. But those other problems need to be solved, because right now, the primary concern actually is not the weakest link right now, which is left tackle. It's all of these other problems that are kind of combining.
I was watching a Bill Barnwell clip before we came on here, and he mentioned that it might have been School, might have been Walter Rouse or whoever, but said pretty hard for the Yeah, pretty hard for the quarterback to succeed when neither of the edges are touched by the tackles. And, it is funny you mentioned that. I think this line might have some communication issues because remember, they haven't played together as a line for long. Ryan Kelly comes in, Will Fries comes in. You got three new starters on the inside. You don't have Christian Darrisaw for most of camp and in those first two games. And then Brian
And
O'Neill,
you don't have Fries for a lot of camp either,
correct.
right?
Yeah. That's another good point. I mean, these guys haven't really played as a unit together. They've gotten their practice reps, but when you're in an actual game, ask JJ McCarthy how quickly things can go sideways. Like it is something that maybe just needs to be resolved with time. Again, it's kind of the motto of the show. It's 2 weeks. Like eventually they are going to get reps together. They're going to get more comfortable. Hopefully, Ryan Kelly bounces back from this concussion. I mean, it's kind of scary looking at that concussion history right now, but they just need some continuity in there because I think eventually once that gets solved, I mean, I think they'll look better and better as the season goes along, but you got to get Christian Darrisaw back in there. I think he's one of the biggest pieces you have, and I think it'll make life easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's going to kind of lighten the load when it comes to the way that they might design their pass protection plans. Like one of the things that I found really interesting is a couple of years ago, I was taking a look at kind of what the Bengals were doing with Lyle Collins back when they had him at right tackle. And the way that he improved their pass protection was not just that he was a huge upgrade over, was it, I think Jonah Williams was the previous guy there. And they might have kicked Jonah Williams inside after that, but
Yeah.
it wasn't just that he was an upgrade over whoever was playing right tackle. He said he was such a significant upgrade that they were able to put him on an island. And by that, I don't just mean he gets to pass protect 1-on-1 without help. He said they literally split him out wider and wider, which forces, because the defense aligns based off of the alignment of the offensive line, it forces the edge rusher who wants to line up on the outside shoulder of that tackle to move further and further out. Now they have to take one or even two more steps, even if they win against Lyle Collins. They have to take one or two more steps in order to get to the quarterback. You can only do that if you've got a really high quality tackle. And I know that people don't really think of Lyle Collins as this like elite tackle, and that's fair. But for the Bengals' purposes, he was performing that role really well. And you need to do that because the athleticism it takes to be able to recover on an inside move when you expand that gap, or to pick up on a stunt when they try to do something with. Like, there's a ton of things that you need to be able to do that adds a ton of pressure to what you do, but it overall reduces the pressure plan if that left or right tackle, whoever's on an island, does a lot more. And then the rest, those other four, are acting kind of as a unit. And again, that unit's going to need to have communication, but there are ways you could take advantage of an elite player that are more than just, well, he's good, and so he's going to be an upgrade. That part is true and important, but like maybe you can kind of build around the fact that Darrisaw is somebody you can kind of treat like a Trent Williams, the person he's the most often compared to, and push him a little bit further out, lengthen the amount of time it takes for a pass rusher coming off the edge to get to you, complicate their pass rush blitz plans, and then hopefully he's got enough juice to handle what's going to happen on the inside when you kind of push some guy a foot or two or even 3 feet further out from the rest of the line than he typically is. So there are ways, but I just think like it's time on task and communication, and with Jurgens in there, the open question about kind of how well that's going to kind of continue to evolve.
Well, one player that will have a vested interest in the offensive line that's not a quarterback is Jordan Mason. He will take over as the starting running back for Aaron Jones, who is out the next 4 weeks with a bum hamstring. He was placed on IR earlier this week. 667 yards, 3 touchdowns, and 5.2 yards per carry in the first 7 games for San Francisco last season. Remember, Christian McCaffrey was out with the calf, Achilles, like weird thing he went to Brazil for. My question here is Jordan Mason RB1 season going to end better than Alexander Madison RB1 season? Because same thing, backup quarterback, starting role. What are your expectations for Jordan Mason in this role?
I think Mason is much closer to starting quality running back than Madison, but I think that the comparison is fair, not just because he's a backup that's being asked, but like they play similar styles or they fulfill similar roles, right? Like the idea that you've got a between the tackles kind of guy who powers through more than has the kind of speed of shiftiness to kind of evade tacklers. And Mason is like eighth or something in the NFL among running backs in yards after contact per attempt. Like he's bearing out his reputation as a guy that's kind of tough to take down, even if you've got him. And he also is showcasing like pretty good vision. And I think here's the thing, better burst than I expected. And so, which is Madison was always interesting because he is a really good athlete, but not in the ways that directly translate to what we see on the field as a running back. Like he's really good at hurdling, which is like not a remarkably useful skill.
If
Like
somebody's in front of you, it is, I guess.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, and he did use it sometimes, but like it doesn't happen a lot where that's helpful. Whereas like acceleration and speed, which is supposed to be tied to something like jumping, is more important for a running back. But either way, Mason has a little bit more burst than I think a lot of us expected, which is nice to see. I think that his ability to kind of grind out 3-4 yards on plays that maybe only be blocked for two is a big asset. We were talking about keeping the Vikings on schedule. Well, the Vikings were much more on schedule when Jordan Mason runs than Aaron Jones runs. Now, Aaron Jones has only had a very small sample of rushing plays. I don't want to say that, we have enough evidence to demonstrate that Aaron Jones is a worse running back than Jordan Mason. I kind of still trust that Jones, once he comes back from injury, will showcase the reason that the Vikings believed in him and showcase kind of the level of skill that he showed last year. But Mason is in a really good spot. And the fact that there's not a drop off and even an improvement in the running game when he's playing, I think tells us about his ability to kind of handle that load. And I think what's interesting about him, unlike a lot of backup running backs, is that I think he can just take a bell cow load. Like obviously the Vikings have promoted Xavier Scott and he's got the ability to kind of play in that role because I don't think they want Ty Chandler doing that. And that's fine, but like we saw Mason take on a bell cow role in San Francisco, right? We know that he can do that. It's not like a Tony Pollard situation where it's like, well, as a backup running back, he's outstanding. What happens when we make him a starter? Oh, well, okay. That's not terrible, right? It's not like that. It does seem to be that he just plays at that level, which is really nice.
Yeah, and I think getting him involved in the running game is going to help that offense a little bit, and I think it could be one of the ways to help Wentz out. Another way is to revamp that defense, and that's got some questions as far as injuries are concerned as well. Harrison Smith still limited in practice with that illness. You got Blake Cashman out last week. They got Gord on the ground with a run. I feel like you mentioned this earlier. I feel like this defense is playing at a high level, but I also, see they're 0-3 or 0-4 without Blake Cashman on the field. I think I called him Brian Cashman by accident, but that's just baseball brain taking over.
Yeah.
You know, is Harrison Smith the straw that stirs the drink on that defensive side? Or, what has your opinion of this defense been in the first two games? Because in my opinion, Sunday could have gotten a lot worse if the defense didn't play the way that they did, limiting the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the defense absolutely does need to improve in the running game, and I think a lot of the problem there is how they fit against the run. It's like there's a lot of freelancing, especially from Ivan Pace. And Ivan Pace is always going to kind of do that, and Blake Cashman had the ability to kind of take over, and just be like, "Oh, he's doing that. Well, I guess I got to do this now, right?" Which is a underrated skill for a defender. Like it is really difficult for a linebacker to like have an assigned gap and then realize I guess that's not happening. And figuring out what they need to do to solve this new problem that was just created. And it's worth it because Ivan Pace does awesome stuff when he's right. You just have to solve it when he's wrong, right?
Yeah.
So, and Eric Wilson, he had a really great week one. A lot of that value came on special teams, but I think that he played well from scrimmage. And then week two, he just kind of looked lost. And I think some of that's just Ivan Pace doing Ivan Pace stuff. And it's like, oh, I wasn't prepared for any of that, right? Having somebody on defense that has the recognition capability to kind of figure out what needs to happen is so huge. And it's not something we talk about a ton. We talk about pure coverage ability, pure, run stopping ability. And yeah, Harrison Smith, Blake Cashman, they've got both of those. They've got a ton of both of those. But they're both very, very intelligent and do a very good job of adapting to the changing conditions on the field very quickly. So Harrison Smith being there, should he be available, is going to be a big help, not just because he's a good safety, which obviously, he is despite his age, but also because his ability to kind of communicate the evolving problems or just begin to solve problems as they appear is so big. And that's something that he and Blake Cashman share. It's so big that it can help solve these run game problems because they emerge from, Javon Hargrave getting washed out in the run game. They emerge from, Ivan Pace deciding he's going to blitz even though it's a rush down or whatever, right? And having someone who recognizes that that's happening and immediately like understanding like, oh, that I got to fix that. And this is how I do that will help a lot. But in coverage, they're very good. They're extremely good. And that helps a lot. Especially like right now, I mean, next week is going to be an interesting test case of what happens because the Bengals have a really, really poor running game right now and a really curious passing game without Joe Burrow, but effective, right? And so the question is like, Bengals have a poor running game. The Vikings have demonstrated really poor rush defense. Are they going to decide to lean on their running game, or are they just going to throw a bunch of 8-yard slants because it's like 6'4", 6'3" T. Higgins against 5'10" anybody? Everybody's
Yeah.
5'10" in that secondary.
Yeah.
Um, so like, I don't know, because like the Vikings defense has been pretty bad against the run, but the Bengals offense has also been pretty bad, establishing the run. So we'll kind of see the way that they produce that, but like the risk of being bad in the passing game is so extraordinary, and the risk of being bad in the running game is like whatever. That I don't know that this is going to be a problem that they're going to be extremely proactive about solving. It does need to get better, right? And there are trade-offs in choosing to be better at one than the other. But I think that you can improve your run game defense without sacrificing anything in the passing game. And I think that needs to be the priority. And I think having Cashman back or which Cashman, I believe the idea is that once he comes off short-term IR, he'll be available pretty close to immediately. Or Harrison Smith, who may be available this week, I don't know. Having either of them or both of them back, I think is going to help resolve a lot of those problems.
Yeah. And now you did mention a little bit slants all day. I actually have in my notes Jake Browning's going to get his revenge part 2 by just running RPOs for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, it burned him the last night. And why
Eric
not?
Wilson, if he's like he's gonna be in hell. Like it's just gonna be awful.
Brain on fire, just like, oh Jesus, another and he's a smart dude. I like Eric Wilson and all, but I mean it's just gonna be a lot of pressure on the Vikings to make the right
it's like
read.
3 hours of someone attacking your brain. Like even if you're a smart dude, that's gonna suck.
Just awful. It's how I felt Monday morning after the Vikings game. It was great. Just someone taking a jackhammer to my dome. Vikings Bengals Sunday afternoon, US Bank Stadium. Funny story. When I was at the game on Sunday, I opened up a ticketing app to see how much tickets were the next week. They were $250 when I was standing at that tailgate. They're now down to 115. So the hype is real. You got Jim Nantz, you got Tony Romo on the call for the Jake Browning Carson Wentz matchup. What are you looking forward to in this matchup, and what's your prediction for Sunday?
Man, the Vikings are favored by like 2.5,
3 points according to the Action Network.
Yeah, so like, which I find curious because I would regard Jake Browning as a higher or at least more productive backup. So like, I think the drop off from Joe Burrow to Jake Browning is much smaller than the drop off from like a starting quality quarterback to Carson Wentz. Not that the Vikings were playing with that, but like, it's curious. But the Vikings the Bengals just have a bad defense. The Vikings have like a really strong defense, and maybe that's going to be kind of the thing. I don't know. I feel like I would personally think that the Bengals are favored until I maybe took some time to draw it out and think about it a lot more. But like, I love that skill core. Obviously, the offensive line's a huge problem. But Jake Browning is really good against the blitz and has been good against Brian Flores' blitz specifically. 2023, he did really, really well against the blitz. He actually did much worse against rush 4. And so I'm kind of curious, like, how they're going to modulate their approach in response to that information or whatever. But like, I think that um, to me, it's going to be Jake Browning versus Brian Flores is the matchup, which is not kind of the traditional answer to this question. Like, I want to know what, Justin Jefferson's going to do against DJ Turner. I don't know.
Yeah.
He's going to be fine. I don't care. Justin Jefferson's going to win against whoever is up there. I believe like one of their corners is hurt. And so Josh Newton might have to play instead. Cam Taylor-Britt may be injured. It may not be Cam Taylor-Britt. It might be someone else, but someone may be injured. And so Josh Newton could be playing. Cam Taylor-Britt.
He was DNP today.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if that happens, then Josh Newton's going to play, and Josh Newton is a smart but not very athletic cornerback. And so we'll kind of see what happens. Whatever. Pick your matchups. If it's DJ Turner, if it's Cam Taylor-Britt, if it's Josh Newton, if it's the Dax Hill, whatever. Pick Jefferson's going to win. I don't really care about that matchup because I'm confident in it. I am much more curious about how Jake Browning is going to resolve dealing with like all the chaos that comes with Brian Flores, because he's done it once, right? And he did really well in the chaotic situations. He just didn't do as well when things were as expected, which, I mean, those were like sim pressures. It's not like the Vikings just ran 4, but like, so it was also confusing. But when they rushed 4, they did much better against Browning than when they rushed 5 or 6 or 7.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at my notes trying to think of the next one. Yeah, I mean, trying to think about this matchup. I think I just want to see the Vikings put together a good game. I want to see them pass protect Carson Wentz. I even if Carson Wentz doesn't throw for 300 yards and 4 touchdowns or whatever, we expect them to do in Madden. I want to see the Vikings come out, play a clean, functional game, get a win on the board. You're 2-1. You go over to Europe. You have 2 winnable games against Pittsburgh and Cleveland. I think this is an advantage they can take it, or a situation they can take advantage of. If Joe Burrow was the quarterback, I think I'd be a little bit more leery about this matchup. But in that Jake Browning game, I mean, that was the Brandon Powell tush push disaster, where it's like, why do you have a 5'6", 160-pound, wide receiver pushing your quarterback? That was an overtime game the Vikings could have won. So I feel confident about this one. I think the Vikings have the firepower to win. It's just about, can you execute? Can you start doing your job? Because I feel like, the execution just hasn't been there, partially because of the quarterback, but partially because some players haven't been living up to their potential. And I think it'll be a win on Sunday. As far as a score, 2016. Want to roll with that?
Sure. Like a missed extra point or something, or
a doink, or a double doink. Let's just go with let's
sure.
have the I don't know. It's like what is it in hockey? I don't know if there's like a term, but they hit all 3. I think it was like in Mighty Ducks or something, where Gordon Bombay and the Iceland coach were like, no, I can hit all 3 posts.
Right.
The triple deke. Yes.
Well, the triple deke was the move to get past, right?
It was the shootout move. Yes.
Yeah.
And then nobody could stop it until the ice cold goaltender got off the bench. And yeah.
Look,
greatest move. D2 is the best one. I want to throw that out there because you know why? Because it is batshit crazy. It is off the wall. Think about the way it was set up. Like D1, Gordon Bombay gets a DUI, so he has to coach youth hockey, leads them to the Pee Wee Championship. Great, cool story. Natural progression. We want you to coach the fucking Olympics. Like, here's the U.S. team where we got everybody here.
Here's a guy from Texas who, for some reason, is allowed to have a lasso. Here's this goalie from Maine that no one seems to like.
Here's this guy from Florida who can't stop, but somehow he made this like Olympic team.
Skater, yeah. So here's a figure skater who, like, obviously in the story, like, they don't talk about this, but like he has to be allowed access to figure skating blades, right? Because otherwise he can't do any of that shit.
Yes.
Like, what? No, it is a truly psycho movie. And also, I didn't like 3 for a lot of reasons. in part because like a lot of it takes place at the Blake schools and
Yeah.
I didn't like the way they treated Charlie Conway in that one. Just the way the writing worked, and Conway had to like betray everyone, and like, what's he doing with the varsity? That doesn't make any sense anyway. So, two was great. Two was outstanding. And
Gordon,
oh my god, they just picked up Keenan from the streets of LA. What?
Hey, what is that like registration process like? They just go, hey, we're adding a new player to our roster. Oh, where's he from? Oh, we met him on the
outside
street hockey. I don't know.
You might have seen him on the way in, actually.
4th and Main, something like. He was talking shit to our players last week. Go check it out. But speaking of checking stuff out, what's going on at the Wide Left Substack, Arif?
Yeah, so there's that piece I mentioned where I kind of want to talk about this pressure problem that's facing them, given like this incredible slate of pass rushers, and even talk about the defensive tackles. They also have an incredible slate of defensive tackles to be up against. But on top of that, we've got pieces coming in that are exploring stuff about like the college football playoff. We had somebody actually inside a mock college football playoff selection meeting. It's so cool. Like all the official selectors were there. And so there's going to be some discussion about that. That's coming up soon. We've got stories about. I'm working on. I haven't announced this writer yet, but I'm working on a weekly piece where she dives into advanced stats from every NFL game, and then she's going to do a much longer piece where she talks to a bunch of different players who've suffered like injuries and stuff like that about their perspective on the game. It's going to be a really great piece. But yeah, like right now I've got a piece coming up about the pressure problem for the Vikings. We do weekly game recaps on the Vikings, of course. We've got Freeze Football doing a bunch of breakdowns. He just published a piece today about like, is the offense like terminally boned, or do we actually have something to solve and work with here? And how would Carson Wentz have kind of handled some of the offensive problems that came up? So there's a ton of stuff over at Wide Left Football that people like. People really loved Alex's Brazil piece. That's still getting a bunch of shares and reads and stuff like that. Alex went to Brazil. It was a disaster. And his misery, it turned out to be excellent writing. So, check all of that out. I'm so happy with the content we have on the site right now.
That's usually how it works. Like if you just write about something absolutely chaotic, it's like, this is actually great, man. A great work out there. It's like, I feared for my life. Thank you. This was
exactly. I was like, I'm glad that happened to you. Yeah.
Well, anyway, you got Wide Left .football, the Wide Left Substack. You got Norse Code. You've got, what was the rebranded name? Minnesota
Viking Squad Show.
Viking Squad Show over, is that the Locked On Network still?
Yep, it's Locked On Network.
You can go check it out over there. Of course, this is the Viking Age podcast, so I got to tell you about VikingAge.com. My regular co-host, Adam Patrick, runs that site. All of the coverage to get you ready for Vikings Bengals. Of course, I got my work over at Zone Coverage, along with the Twins and the Wild stuff that I write. And we got the FanSided RBN network to keep up with everything that's going on in the NFC North. You got the Packers over at Dairyland Express. You got the Bears over at Windy City. You got the Lions at Detroit Jock City. And of course, the newest site to the RBN, Sporting Soda, where we got some Viking stuff over there. But this is the Viking podcast, the official podcast of the VikingAge.com. I am Chris Schad at The Real Chris Schad. He is Arif Hasan at Arif Hasan NFL. We do this every week right here on the Viking Age YouTube channel, and we're in podcast form on Apple and Spotify the very next day. So however you consume this, like, comment, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new episode and we can spread the word to the masses. For Arif Hasan, I am Chris Schad. 4 letters, 1 word, Skull.